Today we are going to take a look at the respiratory system, which allows you to breathe in and breathe out. We're going to look at the fun facts, the functions, the structures, and of course how it helps us with homeostasis. Now for some fun facts. Did you know that our body does not use most of the air we breathe into our lungs? Did you know that the adult lungs contain about 300 million alveoli, which allow the lungs to absorb a large amount of oxygen? Did you know that if all of our alveoli were opened up and laid flat, they would cover the floor of 3 bowling alley lanes? Whoa. Now let's take a look at the functions of the respiratory system. What does it do? First, it moves oxygen into the lungs for delivery to the circulatory system. Remember that the circulatory system is responsible for getting the oxygen to the body, but it's the function of the respiratory system to get the oxygen to the circulatory system. The second function is to remove carbon dioxide and water from your body. Again, remember that this whole process is in exact opposition to photosynthesis, what plants do, where they take our carbon dioxide and water and, along with energy from the sun, produce glucose for themselves and oxygen as a byproduct. So it's in reverse to what we do. Now let's take a look at the 6 structures of the respiratory system. We'll list them out here and then we'll go into details on the next slides. First of all, we have the nose, then we have the pharynx, which is your throat, then we have the larynx, your voice box, then we have the trachea, which is your windpipe, the lungs, which include the bronchi and the alveoli inside, and then, not necessarily a structure that is part of the respiratory system, it's actually part of the muscular system, which is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the breathing muscle. So the first structure we'll discuss that is part of the respiratory system is your nose. The nose consists of 2 openings, or nostrils, which are separated by a thin wall. There are blood vessels in the nose which help warm the air, and in case it's cold outside, that's a good idea to breathe through your nose. It helps warm the air before it gets to your lungs. It also contains mucus, which will moisten the air and help trap particles. Then there's also little very tiny hairs that we call cilia, which will sweep that mucus into the throat. Yes, gross, but that is where it is swallowed and destroyed in the stomach, the acids of the stomach. The second structure we're going to look at is the pharynx, known to most people as the throat. Air flows through here after it leaves the nasal cavities. This is the only part of the respiratory system that's actually shared with another system. Now, which system do you think that is? That is the digestive system that shares the pharynx with the respiratory system. The third structure we're going to look at is the larynx, which comes right after the pharynx. Your larynx is your voice box. It is located at the top of the trachea, and this is where the vocal cords are. They actually stretch across the opening of the larynx. We're not going to go into details about how your voice box works or how the larynx works, but I want to point out the epiglottis, which sits directly above the larynx. The epiglottis is the flap that allows your pharynx to function 2 ways. It allows you to breathe, which allows air to go down the trachea, or it switches when you're eating and swallowing food, and it allows that same space to be used to swallow food, which is going to go down to your stomach through the esophagus. The next structure you need to know about for the respiratory system is your trachea, also known as the windpipe. It feels like a tube with a series of ridges in the front and center of the neck. You can kind of feel there in the very center, and you can feel these ridges. Those are the cartilage in your trachea. Air will leave the larynx and move to the trachea, and it's made of these rings of cartilage that keep it strong and keep it open. You want cartilage there because if you ever get hit in the throat, you don't want a soft collapsible tube there. You want it strengthened with something like cartilage, which is flexible. If it were bone, it might be too rigid and crack, so cartilage is probably the best thing for our throats to protect our windpipe. Next, we're going to look at the last major structure of your respiratory system, the lungs, which are two spongy sac-like organs in your chest. Each lung has bronchi, which are tubes that connect to the trachea and direct air into each lung. You've got two bronchi, one going into each lung. Those bronchi are divided into smaller tubes called bronchioles, which look like branches on a tree. So if it were like a tree, it'd be an upside down tree branching into these smaller pieces. At the end of the bronchioles are alveoli. They look like a bunch of grapes. There's a picture up there in the top right. You can see it. They're bunched together. Now, alveoli are covered in tiny blood vessels called capillaries. If you'll recall, we remember from the circulatory system notes that capillaries are these exceedingly small blood vessels, a cell where the walls are a cell thick. In the next slide, we're going to look at how the alveoli work, because the alveoli is where we actually see oxygen going from the air that we breathe in into the bloodstream. Now we're going to talk a little more about the alveoli, because these structures are really important in terms of respiration. The structures of the alveoli are specialized for the movement of gases between the air and your blood. This is where your blood actually picks up oxygen from the air. We call this process gas exchange. We call it gas exchange because oxygen, or O2, is actually exchanged for carbon dioxide, CO2, at this location. Now, how does it work? These alveoli are covered in capillaries, which are really, really tiny blood vessels, and this is very, very important. We'll look at the next slide and we'll see a little more. Gas exchange occurs in 4 steps, and here's the path of airflow in gas exchange. First, air containing oxygen is going to enter the alveoli, having come in to the lungs through the trachea, through your mouth or your nose. The second step is that the O2, the oxygen, is going to pass through the walls of the alveoli, those one cell thick walls, and through the capillary walls into the blood. Then carbon dioxide, CO2, and water are going to pass from the blood into the alveoli. And then CO2 and H2O are exhaled out of the body. That's the whole process of gas exchange. The oxygen comes in, the CO2 and H2O go out. Having looked at the microscopic and molecular way that we breathe, let's pull back a little bit and look at a more macroscopic level and talk about how it is that the lungs actually expand. We have this structure called the diaphragm, which is the muscle that helps control breathing. It's located directly underneath your lungs. It's kind of a C shape to it, And if you are playing a wind instrument in band, you've been told by your band director to work on the strength of your diaphragm and to work on playing your instrument using your diaphragm instead of your lungs. And this is what they're referring to. So let's use the stimulus response model to talk about how the diaphragm actually works, how it happens to work in action. So the stimulus is when we inhale, when we breathe in. The response is that the rib muscles are going to contract, the chest is going to lift upward and outward, and the diaphragm is going to contract and move downward. In the opposite effect, the stimulus is that when we exhale, when we breathe out, the response is going to be that the rib muscles and the diaphragm are going to relax and the chest cavity is going to become smaller. So these two stimuli keep occurring one after the other with these different responses. We inhale, the diaphragm contracts. We exhale, the diaphragm relaxes. Contraction, relax. Contract, relax. As we have discussed with every body system, we have to talk about homeostasis. The most important thing with the respiratory system and homeostasis is that our bodies need oxygen because our cells need it to function, to actually keep us alive. So that's the number one thing. Also, there are many other ways this system helps keep us healthy. For example, if you have particles irritating the lining of your nose or throat, your response is going to be to sneeze. You're going to get these particles and bacteria out of your nose and into the air, which may seem gross, but in terms of survival of you, the individual, that is the best way to guarantee that you're going to stay healthy. Here are some other examples of how the respiratory system helps us with homeostasis, keeping us in balance. Example number 2, if you've got particles irritating the lining of your trachea, then you're going to cough, which is going to send those harmful materials out of the body back out into the air. Again, maybe gross for those around you, but it's going to be the best thing for your body, your survival. Example number 3, if food enters your trachea, which would then be blocking the opening for air to enter your lungs, you would choke. And choking is generally going to force materials out of your windpipe. If you've ever been shown or done the Heimlich maneuver, that's what you're helping with, is you're helping someone who's choking, that can't breathe, by getting something out of their trachea. Example number 4 we have is that when you're exercising, your body needs a lot of oxygen to supply energy. This will make you breathe faster, which will get more oxygen to the cells so that they can produce more energy.